G7 Nations Group Summit has wrapped up the busiest day of the three-day summit. At least 12 people have been killed and 37 seriously injured after a gas explosion in a residential neighborhood in central China. Israel's parliament has started a special session to vote on a coalition seeking to end Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's rule. Hello and welcome to TeleSUR. I'm Jose Daniel Lopez in Quito, Ecuador, and this is from the south. Amid protests, the G7 Nations Group has wrapped up the busiest day of the three-day summit, having discussed a path out of the COVID-19 pandemic, as well as foreign policy and climate change. The G7 leaders are expected to issue a closing declaration promising more financial support for developing countries hit by the climate crisis and funds for infrastructure projects in the developing world. Additionally, the G7 leaders meeting in Cornwall are to adopt strict measures on coal-fired power stations as part of the battle against climate change and are expected to set out plans to reduce emissions from farming, transport, and the making of steel and cement. And during the last day of the summit, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has announced that the G7 wealthy nations have pledged over 1 billion coronavirus vaccine doses for poor nations, half of that coming from the United States.
A week ago, I asked my fellow leaders to help in preparing and providing the doses we need to vaccinate the whole world by the end of 2022. I'm very pleased to announce that this weekend, leaders have pledged over 1 billion doses, either directly or through funding to COVAX. That includes 100 million from the UK to the world's poorest countries, which is another big step towards vaccinating the world. And that's in addition to everything scientists and governments and the pharmaceutical industry have done so far to roll out one of the largest vaccination programs in history.
On the other hand, social activists on Sunday dismissed the pledge from the G7 Nations Group to donate 1 billion vaccine doses to poor countries. They said it was nowhere near enough to stop the global pandemic.
You know, it's funny that the communique says they will do everything they can as fast as possible, and then they talk about 1 year, 1 billion in the next 1 year. It's quite interesting to see how they think that 1 billion doses for 1 year would actually end the pandemic. That's really funny because that would not even take care of 5% of the population. And so it's kind of disappointing because the whole world was really looking up to this richest country that come together, hoping that they could mobilize as a group, you know, to really try to end the pandemic on time. Because the longer it stays, of course, the whole world suffers from that. But we just believe that this is inadequate. It doesn't show the urgency that is required.
Thousands of protesters have marched in Falmouth, England, on the sidelines of the G7 summit to push world leaders to act on climate change. Protests have continued to mount as leaders of the 7 most developed countries meet on a 3-day group of 7 summit. Activists have accused politicians for failure to deliver on their promises on climate action. Climate change is one of the topical issues being discussed at the summit before this year's Global Climate Summit, COP26, set to be held in Glasgow, Scotland.
We are atoning for the sins that we have committed against the earth, against Mother Earth, and we dressed in sackcloth and ashes, and you will see that we all carry the same symbol, which is funding climate hell, which is the greatest crime being committed against the planet.
South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has arrived in the United Kingdom, where he will be attending the G7 Leaders Summit in Cornwall. Though South Africa is not a member of the G7 group, he's attended the summit at an invitation of British Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Upon his arrival, the South African president held talks with the heads of the European Union. Vaccine distribution in Africa is one of the issues the leaders discuss. Upon his arrival, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has met with British Prime Minister Boris Johnson on the third and final day of the G7 summit in Cornwall, England. South Africa, but also Australia, South Korea, and the United Nations and European Union joined the G7 heads of state, with India participating remotely. In other news, talks between Iran and world powers on reviving the 2015 Iran nuclear deal could be resumed in Vienna. Senior diplomats from China, Germany, France, Russia, and Britain made it a hotel in the Austrian capital for the talks. The discussions are aimed at attempting to restore the landmark 2015 agreement to contain Iranian nuclear development, which had been abandoned by the United States during the Trump administration. The U.S. is not formally part of the Vienna meetings, but President Joe Biden's administration has recently expressed willingness to rejoin the deal under terms that will see the U.S. scale back sanctions imposed on Iran.
I believe we need maybe a couple of weeks to clean up the existing text, to remove square brackets around relatively secondary topics, and concentrate on the main things. The main topic at this stage is how the agreement will be implemented, who will do what and when.
Dozens of firefighters have battled to contain a blaze in a fabric shop in the Indian capital of New Delhi. A major fire broke out inside a 4-story commercial building at the Lapat Nagar Central Market in South Delhi on Saturday. More than 70 firefighters worked for over 3 hours to put the fire out and bring the situation under control. The blaze spread quickly to neighboring stores in a shopping district, according to local news media. There are no reports of casualties, and the cause of the fire remains unknown.
And even the police, what they started doing is that the moment police reached here, they saw the seriousness of the matter. They started evacuating all the locals from the residential areas and the shop areas behind them. They started evacuating, and we saw people getting out of the houses. So I think it was a good action by the police that they made sure that there was no further damage that could be caused. And this is the first time that I know that I have seen 5 to 6 shops, getting burned, all of them together. This is the first time that I'm seeing this. I have been here for the past 14 years, and my father is, my father's been here for the past 35 years. We have never seen anything like this.
4 people have been killed in the disputed region of Kashmir when a shootout broke out between rebels and Indian police. Indian security forces have reported that 2 police officers and 2 civilians were killed after Kashmir militants opened fire on a police squad who were enforcing coronavirus restrictions in the main market of Sofore. 3 others were also injured in the shootout. Muslim-majority Kashmir is divided between India and Pakistan, and the region is claimed by both countries. Rebels have been fighting in the region against Indian rule since 1989.
We were together on a roadside. He told me he would go to have a cup of tea. In the meantime, a police vehicle came, which came under attack, and he was shot in the crossfire.
At least 12 people have been killed and 37 seriously injured after a gas explosion in a residential neighborhood in central China. Images supplied by Chinese media show the rescue workers climbing over broken concrete slabs to reach people still trapped inside. Investigations into the cause of the explosion were still going on. The explosion comes a day after 8 people were killed and 3 others injured in an accident at a chemical facility in Guiyang province.
After 14 hours, the city committee and government have deployed 2,000 rescuers to carry out the search and rescue operation. A total of 913 households have been evacuated, and 138 injured people have been sent to hospital for treatment, 37 of whom are severely injured. 12 people died.
More news in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. For the 3rd time, Santiago de Chile has entered a full lockdown since the arrival of the COVID-19 pandemic to the country. More than 8 million residents living in and around the city must stay at home from Saturday, despite nearly 60% of the country being fully vaccinated. Immunized people who have the mobility pass issued by the authorities to circulate within their commune are excluded from these restrictions. This measure will be evaluated every week by the government. Just last week, Chile registered 45,500 new cases of COVID-19, and intensive care beds are near full capacity, according to health authorities.
It sounds good to me. I think it's excellent. The full lockdown because the pandemic is out of control. The government is garbage and has not been able to manage this since day one. So the vaccine will not save us. The vaccine does not prevent the contagion. It simply prevents hospitals from being overcrowded.
In Peru, indigenous leaders have demanded Pedro Castillo to be appointed as the country's next president after the dispute over the results of the presidential runoff. Leaders from indigenous communities representing almost 7 million people gather as Castillo supporters continue to rally outside his Peru Libre Party headquarters in Lima, hoping for an official announcement regarding the presidential elections. A group of 20 lawyers filed a lawsuit Friday against Keiko Fujimori for creating political turmoil and attempting against democracy.
I am sorry, if the Electoral Tribunal does not solve this, we will move forward with a position to fight. At the same time, we are going to move forward with a legal case to defend these votes, and we believe the popular will should be respected.
Enough of being stepped on. They have always stepped on our rights, just as they didn't when they sterilized indigenous women when her father was in the government. How many men and women leaders were killed and assassinated? We want no more of that. If you, Keiko Fujimori, say you love our country, that you love Peru, they've been dignified and say that you have lost. Yeah.
In the United States, the Congressional Progressive Caucus issued a statement expressing support for the democratic process in Peru. The movement stated that Pedro Castillo has maintained a lead over Keiko Fujimori and that her claims of fraud had not been supported with substantial evidence. It also underlines that Castillo has been widely recognized as the winner of the presidential elections. Bolivian and Peruvian authorities have joined forces to vaccinate the Imata community living in the borderline of both countries. Dozens of people line up in the Desaguadero International Bridge to get the vaccine doses. Authorities estimate that more than 3 million Aymara people live in the Indian region, which is shared by Bolivia, Peru, and Chile. The Desaguadero city, 100 kilometers west of the Bolivian capital La Paz, is an important crossing that has ceased some commercial activities during the past year by the COVID-19 pandemic. The initiative comes as Peru and Bolivia report a further surge in COVID-19 cases, which authorities believe is due to a new, more contagious variant of the virus.
Me siento bien.
I'm fine and I am cheerful. I want to ask of the people in Peru and Bolivia, as siblings we are, for all to get the vaccine for everyone to be protected against this illness. For this campaign, we have prepared 1,000 vaccines that are being delivered, but this is only a beginning. We will continue vaccination in the health centers.
After 46 days of protests against the Colombian government of Iván Duque, the students and human rights organizations rally outside the Attorney General's office in Bogota to demand answers regarding the persons reported as disappeared since the beginning of their national strike mobilizations. The groups called for the more than 300 disappearances to be investigated and for an end to impunity. They also demanded that the police agents involved in the murder of protesters be properly investigated. The move comes after a delegation of the Inter-American Commission on Human Rights finished its visit to the country, where it received testimonies and complaints from the victims of human rights violations, their families, and NGOs collecting data on the abuses. Ecuadorian indigenous groups have protested in the Cotopaxi province against increase in fuel prices. The indigenous leaders have called for the annulment of a fuel price increase decree introduced in 2020 during the government of former President Lenín Moreno. Fuel price hikes in Ecuador has resulted in the rise of the cost of living. In 2019, the country's indigenous people led similar protests, which left 11 people dead and later forced the Moreno government to backtrack on its first plan to raise the price of gasoline as part of an agreement with the International Monetary Fund.
For us, it is important that the incoming government, in this case, Guillermo Lasso, is sensitive to the Ecuadorian people and that we can no longer afford to spend 1 more cent on fuel increases.
Mexico has donated 400,000 doses of the AstraZeneca COVID-19 vaccine to Belize, Bolivia, and Paraguay. Mexico makes this donation in its capacity as President pro tempore of the Community of Latin American and Caribbean States. However, the World Health Organization warned that despite promises of donations, the international COVAX system did not have enough vaccines for the months of June and July. COVAX is a mechanism by which a fair distribution of vaccines is sought and ensures that lower-income countries can have access to it.
400,000 doses of AstraZeneca vaccines that have been manufactured in Argentina and packaged and finished in our country.
Vamos a hacer 3 vuelos.
We are going to make 3 flights in fighter planes of the Mexican Air Force that are heading towards La Paz, Bolivia, towards Asunción, Paraguay, and towards Belize in Belize.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro demanded the United States government lift the sanctions that prevent the country from acquiring COVID-19 vaccines through the COVAX mechanism. The statement came after an international bank blocked a $10 million payment from Venezuela to the mechanism, saying it was under investigation.
What do you call that? What do you call that? Criminal theft, criminal sanctions, criminal actions of the United States of America against Venezuela. I demand today, June 11th, from Venezuela, that the government of Joe Biden cease its blockade of Venezuela's money for the COVAX vaccines.
And we have more stories coming up after one last break, so don't go away. Welcome back. Israel's parliament has started a special session to vote on a coalition seeking to end the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu's 12-year reign. The 8-party alliance will see Naftali Bennett, a right-wing Jewish nationalist, replace Netanyahu. If there is a stalemate in the upcoming crunch vote, it will lead Israel to go to a 5th general election since 2019. Netanyahu, who is battling corruption charges in an ongoing trial, has been dominant in Israel politics after serving as prime minister from between 2009 and 2021. Thousands of protesters gathered in the eve of the parliamentary vote, continuing with their calls for the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to step down. Demonstrators gathered at Netanyahu's residence in Jerusalem, waving banners with messages against the Israeli Prime Minister. Anti-Netanyahu protests have been staged each Saturday at the same venue since July last year. The protesters accuse him of mishandling the COVID-19 pandemic and the economy. Netanyahu became the first sitting Israeli prime minister to be indicted while in office due to corruption charges.
Well, we've been coming for so long. For me, it's mostly to have a moment where I'm here and I feel relieved, like the nightmare is over finally. So this is the main reason for coming, just to celebrate. And also with Netanyahu, we have to see him go, and until he goes, we will continue coming. This is also a reason. 7 people have been killed after 2 bombs hit 2 civilian vehicles in Afghanistan's capital, Kabul. The country's Interior Ministry reported that the attacks target the vehicles on the same road about 2 kilometers apart in a Shiite neighborhood in western Kabul. The first explosion killed 6 people and left 2 wounded. The second blast happened in front of the Muhammad Ali Jinnah Hospital, where COVID-19 patients are currently admitted, and killed 1 and wounded 4 others. No one has immediately claimed responsibility for the attacks.
Unfortunately, a minivan was targeted by a bomb. When I got to the site, I saw 2 wounded victims and 4 dead bodies. We took the wounded victims to hospital.
Several people have been injured and dozens others arrested during anti-government protests in Nigeria's cities Lagos and Abuja. Nigerian police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters who were demonstrating against bad governance and insecurity, as well as the recent Twitter ban by the government of President Muhammadu Buhari. Activists called for nationwide protests to be staged the same day when Nigeria was celebrating its Democracy Day, which marks Nigeria's move to civilian rule more than 20 years ago.
Proper care, kidnapping, banditry, we can go on and on and on. So the people are protesting against a failed government. They are saying enough is enough. Who is the head of that government? It is the president. If the president cannot assure us, if we have even moved past the stage of assurances, if the president cannot swing into action and ensure that the lives of citizens are safeguarded, then he should resign.
Thousands have demonstrated in Burkina Faso to demand security from the government following last week's deadly terrorist attack. The demonstrators, who came from different parts of the country, marched in the city of Dori, blaming the government for not properly securing the area, resulting in continued attacks by militants. At least 132 people had been killed last week by armed militants in Sohan department. The demonstrations were organized several days ago by civil society organizations and local residents.
We came out to show our displeasure, the indignation that we are suffering. There have been so many solutions sought by the government, so many decrees, so many procedures. But so far, that does not prevent, here in the Sahel, our brothers and sisters from dying.
Pope Francis has demanded humanitarian aid be delivered to residents of the torn-worn Tigray region of northern Ethiopia. Speaking at his Sunday noon blessing, Francis said he was thinking of the people of Tigray who had been struck by a grave humanitarian crisis that has exposed the poorest to famine. Francis also called for an immediate end to fighting in Tigray, the return of social harmony, and for all food aid and health care to be guaranteed. The United Nations and social activist groups say more than 350,000 people in Tigray are suffering famine, with millions more at risk of it.
It's not possible to close the eyes in front of the exploitation of children who are deprived of the right to play, to study, and to dream. According to the estimate of the International Labour Organization, today, the children exploited for labor are over 150 million. It's a tragedy. This is happening today. Many children are suffering because of this. To be exploited for child labor. Let's renew altogether the effort to eliminate this slavery of our times.
Denmark football star Christian Eriksen collapsed on the pitch during a Euro 2020 game against Finland in Copenhagen, causing the suspension of the match in the first half. Danish players were in tears as medical staff tried to revive the Inter Milan player, who suddenly collapsed near the touchline. After around 15 minutes, Eriksen was carried off the field, followed by the rest of the Denmark team, while Finland's players also walked off. After the incident, the Danish Football Union announced on Twitter, Christian Eriksen is awake and is undergoing further examinations. And we come to the end of this news brief, but remember you can find this and many other stories in our website at telesurenglish.net. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.